Thank you for spending time out of your valuable day to us for this topic with challenges that most organizations face at some level on resource capacity planning. And we'll talk about how OnePlan has its unique approach for adaptive portfolio management to bring that all together. So let's start with, part of the reason that we are here talking about this topic is because in this day of cloud tools and cloud computing tools and easy access to software, there is greater than ever a proliferation of tools for project and portfolio and resource management across an organization. This is kind of been derived from a client of ours that we had who, if you look at the different disciplines down the left-hand side of demand management, portfolio management, project management, time management, all that across the board, and then across the different functional areas across the top, and you look at the different tool sets that were being used across the board between Excel, Outlook, PowerPoint, Jira, Smartsheets, Microsoft Project, you name it. The idea there is it creates definitely a disparity of information. It creates different pockets of information and silos that sometimes are hard to bridge without a lot of manual effort. On top of that, organizations are compounding this because they're striving to become more agile. And sometimes the traditional tools that they've had in the past don't lend themselves to doing work in the new methods and ways that they would like to for the types of projects and the types of work that they're working on. So as we look at more traditional project and portfolio management on the right-hand side in the green, many people have started there, but they're striving to become more agile. Some strive to get all the way over to the left to the dark blue to become full agile portfolio management and do everything in an agile fashion. But the analysts, like Gartner, Forrester, et cetera, have come to the realization that the vast majority of those people, even though striving to get all the way to the left, usually end up in that adaptive piece in the middle, where it's a hybrid of agile and waterfall and sometimes mashups of those types of things or cherry-picked versions of those things, not only through a multi-year journey to become agile in an agile transformation, but sometimes just end up there permanently because certain projects don't lend themselves in their organizations to more of an agile approach. So we're going to focus a little bit today on this kind of adaptive approach with all these different tools and different methodologies. Now, because we have this proliferation of tools and we end up with these pockets or silos of information, it's because we have a myriad of tools being used for project portfolio and resource management that creates this. And we end up with disconnected information. And but by meaning disconnected, if we each have our own version of things, our own portion of the information, it's difficult cohesively as an organization to remain accurate and current across the board, across all dimensions of the project and portfolio management data, as well as across the different organizational pieces that are actually supporting this. Consequently, people are using these multiple tools, and very often it necessitates the duplication of the same data being put in different tools. Not only is this time consuming, but it's also prone to errors as we transcribe that information. Ultimately, if this data is distributed and scattered around, we end up doing at least some type of manual or at least semi-manual mashup of data from multiple tools and data sources to make that happen, unless we're putting it all in some big data warehouse. So for the purposes of this topic today, this makes comprehensive resource planning more difficult, and it typically ends up happening in its own separate data silo that is disconnected from the rest of the project and portfolio management information. So this is what we find is happening out there in the marketplace today. So add to this the just general resource management challenges organizations face. One is resource ownership. In matrixed organizations, for example, you may have the functional areas that actually contain the resources that you need, and the project organizations that need to tap those and get allocated resources from them. In the more agile context, you might have dedicated teams, but then again, even when you have dedicated teams, that there are sometimes shared or constraining resources that are shared services across the organization where this still is an issue. Resource focus. As we get requests and projects being spawned off from all these different silos that we talked about, what should be the priority of the individual resource that's working on it, that's getting hit from a number of different angles with work that's coming to them from these different silos? What is their focus? What should be their priority? And then there's the non-project workload. Do we underestimate non-project workload that people have? Is their true bandwidth really just a fraction or even a small fraction of their available bandwidth to work on project work? And are we overly optimistically forecasting what it's going to take to get these things done? On the resource tracking side of things, just because you put somebody's name down on a resource plan doesn't mean that they're available to show up on Monday to work on that particular plan or that particular project. How are we tracking and getting information from these various constituencies in these different silos? How are we getting that all together cohesively to understand how we're tracking compared to what we planned and what we have left to go, and be able to figure out how we're going to get to the finish line and meet the commitments that we've made to our stakeholders? Resource visibility. I think this goes without saying. If you got pockets of information around the organization, each that have a piece of the puzzle, it's sometimes very difficult to get that complete cohesive picture. And then resource reporting, having that picture and then getting reporting across all these variety of data sources becomes difficult in and of itself, which is just one dimension of the reporting challenge. And then resource management generally lends itself to the fact that it is granular, time-phased information of where we're going to be each month, each week, maybe even each day. And the idea is that a lot of those time-phased data is a lot of data to look at. It can be an eye chart. How do we turn that into consumable, useful information for decision support? Then layer on the resource management maturity dimensions. What are we ready to do as an organization, right? What can we do culturally? Where are we at in our evolution as we mature in project and portfolio management and the resource management aspect of those types of things? What does resource management, what is that going to mean to us, and what can we actually achieve, and what can we sustain in the near term? Simple, very high level, maybe determine the roles and the resources that you have. And sometimes a high level resource capacity plan is the way you may want to start, and just say, these are the roles I need, and for how long, and to what degree, or what percentage of their availability do I need them? That's sometimes easy place to start because it requires the least rigor and the least amount of data. Now, planning, tracking, granularity could get more detailed as you get more mature. Maybe you want to get down to eventually where you want to be able to get down to specific tasks or work items, be able to plan specific named individuals to those tasks, and be able to have that contribute to an overall resource plan. The challenge there is that if you're not at the same level of maturity across the organization, the veracity of the information you get from that very granular level rolling up may or may not be, let's just say, reliable. And the idea is that we have to be marching in kind of the same direction, have the same assumptions and the same planning methods to make that happen. So that's something you have to ask yourself, are we ready to do that as an organization? And then there's a concept of approval and negotiation. Do we in a matrixed organization have to submit, say, here's what I need. I need a business analyst. And do I have to go to the organization that manages those business analyst resources, and they get to tell me who I can have for that period of time for this particular project or initiative? Do I have the ability to accept or reject the particular nomination of that person? These are the types of things an organization requires process rigor and some process maturity in order to make that work well. And then there's the governance and prioritization, meaning, are we tying these resource plans to a prioritization and a prioritized portfolio of projects that align with the things that are most important to the organization? And that even includes strategic alignment. And then there's forecasting versus actuals. Some organizations say, listen, I just really need to know where I'm going from today. I want to look forward, right? And I want to say, okay, what do I need from today forward to get where I want to go? Others need to be able to track the actuals, that what have I actually spent, and actually look backwards in the past historically, whether it be for capitalization of labor, whether it be for chargebacks internally in an organization, or maybe billing to external clients. The idea of what do we need to do in this regard from a maturity perspective. And then there's resource costing. Are we going to manage rates in this for our resources? And are we going to look at what it costs us from a cost perspective? Are we going to look at bill rates, for example, if we're in a services organization? So these are dimensions that need to be considered, and not only determine what would you like to do, but also be honest with ourselves as what are we capable of doing and sustaining in the near term, and what do we want to grow to maybe in our next phase. Now, with this move to Agile, this doesn't preclude the need for resource management across the board. Even if we're in, dedicated teams and multi-dimensional or multi-functional teams, and they generally tend to work on things together, there are shared resources that come into the mix that have to be allocated appropriately, and that every team can't be needing those shared resources all at the same time to a full capacity level in order to be able to make that happen. So the key here is we still have to have some measure of resource management to understand that. Whether we're doing our agile planning at the team level, there may be scarce resources that are needed or shared resources that have to be planned at a named individual level in order to make that work. And then, as I mentioned earlier on, mature approaches need to consider all work types. The assumption that I'm 100% available to work on the projects just because I'm there doesn't necessarily lend itself to being a good assumption. For example, there's scheduled projects that I work on that may be only 30 to 50% of what I do, right? And that's not an atypical availability, according to Gartner. There's routine work or operational work that happens that I need to do. That might be a significant piece of my bandwidth. And then there's the unplanned, the unscheduled, the things that come up that may be project or unproject related that come into the mix. These could all come together to take 100% of my bandwidth. And if I make an assumption that I'm 80% available for projects or 100% available for projects, and I'm really not, the commitments that I'm making are fallacious. And then this is not just a one-time thing. Sometimes people put together a resource plan, and if it's a complex organization, by the time we put this stuff together in a singular plan and say, I've got this plan, well, guess what? It's not too long after that plan becomes not current. Things change on the ground. Resource situations change. Deliverable situations change. We end up with issues that we tackle. Customers have different demands. And then we have to adjust constantly. So it's a rolling wave process where we constantly got to examine this and says, does the plan we currently have factor in the changes that are coming to us? On top of that, the method that we do to do resource capacity planning has to be factored in. If we want to balance either top-down or top-down and bottom-up resource planning, look at it from a top-down, this is where I was talking earlier about a high-level capacity plan. And this might be not at a detailed task or work item level, but at a project or an initiative level. And this is typically called a capacity plan. Sometimes they're used just as early estimates to say, this is what I think I'm going to need for the project. This is the kind of ask I have when I build a business case and I ask to get it approved. It might just be done in the generic roles that I make, and then there may be the commitments of the organization to say, yes, you can have these resources in order to get this project done. But this ends up usually being an early stage planning and estimating, and is often done at percentages or full-time equivalence-based planning. And it's definitely the easiest method if you're getting into resource management to get started and maintain. And many stay at this level only, and they may just use it for forecasting, understand what they need going forward, and just give themselves a sanity check on what they're going to need to go forward, and see if what they're committing to, they even have a chance or a prayer of meeting those expectations. Now, from the bottom-up perspective, this is where you might say that top-down for you might just be the early planning and estimate and assumptions that you're making. And then once you do start building detailed schedules or detailed plans and backlogs with work items, and then basically start making task assignments, potentially with even named resources, that bottom-up plan is really beginning when the schedules and plans are created, and they may not be there day one. And then you start assigning tasks, resources to tasks and work items, and then you effort or size those estimates, in whatever method makes the most sense. Are they hours, for example, or are they story points, whatever they might be. And then you got to roll up the time phase aggregate effort to come up with an aggregate demand of what's there as far as the resources that we're applying. Now, this definitely requires more detail and more rigor for consistent quality, like I said earlier on. The key is that you might do just one of these approaches, or you might do a combination of these approaches and be able to compare these. And we'll talk about how OnePlan supports that method today, or any of those methods. Now, what are people doing today? With this proliferation of tools we talked about earlier on, many people are doing this all in Excel today. And it's because it's freely available. We all know how to use Excel to some degree, and we may be unaware of alternatives. The downside is it's generally disconnected from everything else, the project portfolio, the schedules themselves, the ability to roll this stuff up comprehensively across the entire organization. It's a static model that, once you change one thing, you have to change many, many cells in order to make it current and accurate. And there's better ways to do this, and hopefully we can show you some of those today. And resource planning doesn't happen in a vacuum. As we mentioned, should it be tied to other things? Well, if we look at the resource process at a high level in the blue boxes, and we look at the gray chevrons in here of where you might start with an idea or a request for a project. You might make a go, no-go decision to pursue this. Then people build a business case, and then it becomes a viable candidate to become a project, and it becomes part of maybe the proposed portfolio you're thinking about doing. Well, this is where it potentially intersects with our ability to apply resources. Now, early on, you identify the generic roles you have in an organization. You determine how much of each role you have. You identify constraining resources and people or named individuals that you have. And then you try to time sequence those projects in the proposed portfolio. And then you try to match the high level demand to supply. And then you usually have some committee or team or executives for governance that approves the portfolio and then requests that resource allocation to where we then have to specifically decide and figure out who is going to actually do this work, not just some generic role or type. So these things work in concert. And if you want to be effective, they should be working together. Now, OnePlan is a solution that gives you the opportunity to do all that. And the title of our webinar today was about from different popular work management platforms, meaning we can take, now OnePlan doesn't need these. OnePlan does have its own planning tools in there from top down and bottom up, and from a scheduling and backlog perspective. But if you are committed to using other work execution tools, like you see here, Smartsheets, Project for the Web from Microsoft, Project Professional, Azure DevOps, Jira, etc., you can use those tools and with our connectors, pull that data in on a routine basis to feed into an overall comprehensive portfolio. And for today's topic, resource management process. So if you think about that, organizations might be using different methodologies like we talked about. Some may be using more iterative and more waterfall approaches, right? And they may be using different tools to do those things. In this case, some of the iterative tools might be Azure DevOps or Jira, or maybe you might be using the iterative tools in OnePlan. For waterfall, you might be using, say, a Microsoft project, and some people might be using Smartsheets, or maybe some waterfall in OnePlan. The key is that you end up needing an overall portfolio of information that includes a resource dimension to it, and be able to roll that up to, say, different portfolios or programs, and maybe even align with strategies in your organization. The key is we need to give the teams the tools that they need to be effective, but leadership needs the visibility that they require in order to lead the organization and make decisions and adjust to changes as they happen. Now, even if everyone is agile in your organization, you're just using agile approaches, you may still be using different tools, and you still may be looking at things like more agile-oriented types of metrics that you see down below, burn-ups and burn-downs and velocity, etc. But leadership may still want to see these things in terms of traditional language of the business, like costs and metrics and indexes, etc. And the idea of when they're going to deliver things. And OnePlan gives us the ability to marry these two worlds and meet the needs of all these different stakeholders. So if we think about OnePlan overall and the capabilities in the process flow, and I'll go through this quickly because we're going to demonstrate this. We think about the intake. There's a possibility of having a strategic plan or objectives and key results that allow us to, look at these plans and understand what leadership wants to do with this organization overall. And we might even have enterprise architecture, things like applications and products and business capabilities that we need to factor into this. But ultimately, these spawn off ideas and requests. So even if you don't have those two, strategy and the enterprise architecture piece in play here, the ideation and the request piece usually is in play when we have a project management organization or a portfolio management organization. And then in the planning side of these things, we have to do portfolio planning, which might be done in more traditional list views or more board views or more roadmap views. But ultimately for today's topic, you have to have the capacity planning dimension of this to understand, do we have the capability to deliver on what we say we're going to do? Or are we stretching ourselves beyond our ability to do that? Or do we even have pockets of resources that are underutilized potentially, which isn't often the case, but it can happen. And ultimately, there's a financial dimension of this, which can be part of that, can be the labor costs that come from that resource capacity planning. We talked about things changing. The ability to do what-if scenario modeling and have the what-if scenario modeling factor in the resource loads as I make decisions on alternatives is very important. So having a capacity plan in place in the first place helps us do more effective what-if scenario modeling. On the execution side, we have work plans and we have agile plans in OnePlan itself. You don't need another tool to do that. You can build your own waterfall plans, your own backlogs, and your sprint plans, etc. But the key here today is if you have other popular tools in place, OnePlan has connectors to use those as the source of the data for individual plans and pull that in via those connectors, whether it be Microsoft Planner or Project for the web or Smartsheet, etc. Whether it be Azure DevOps, whether it be Jira being pulled into the agile plans. We can do that, bring that together so they can all be included in the resource management process holistically. We can also have work items that have resources assigned to them as well, like specifically things like issues, etc. And that can be factored into the mix as well right there in OnePlan. Now, the resource managers themselves, they get involved in helping decide the resourcing with the project managers and the Scrum Masters for who's going to be involved. And so that individual resource planning at the project level is important. They might start generically, but then there has to be maybe some negotiation as who you're going to get to do that work from the functional organization. And that all from an individual project execution basis then feeds up to that overall portfolio level capacity plan. So we have a complete picture as a natural output of working through that process. And then we have things like my work and timesheets. So you can actually report time against your projects or provide status, regardless of what scheduling or execution tool the actual work came from. You could status it right here from within OnePlan in one place. Then ultimately, reporting's important. The status reporting, which has a resource dimension to it, dashboards that have a resource dimension to it, and even visualizations on how these things interrelate and things we have to factor in and consider. And OnePlan has added some artificial intelligence assistance into its tool. We call it Sophia. And Sophia can actually help us analyze and find some solutions and even do some data creation for us if we ask it to do so. So the ultimate thing here is we want to do the right work, and then we want to do the work right and with the resources that we do have, embark upon a plan that's achievable. So strategy, execution, and alignment, building an OKR-based strategy plan is in OnePlan. But the key then is, can we align that with the portfolio to ensure that resources are allocated to the initiatives that are of the highest value and strategically aligned to the organization? This is important today, and many organizations are striving to do this. We start from the bottom up by building those plans up from an individual project by project or initiative by initiative basis. And we build those plans the way we need to. And then overall, we get to see an overall organization-wide roll-up of that information and what the aggregate looks like, and what we're facing, and maybe what bottlenecks we might have that we have to address, where we're short, where we have to beef up or contract and those types of things. And then we can leverage it for strategic portfolio analysis and what if. So for example, I can go look at my portfolio, look at where the scheduled things are and when we're going to do these things, but then look at the resource dimension at the bottom and say, wow, there's a lot of red here. It looks like I'm over allocated beyond maybe being able to realistically finish this out the way it says up above. And then you can take that resource planning, and because of cost structures that are available for your resources in OnePlan, you can translate that into labor costs. So as part of your overall financial tracking, you can have your labor costs automatically created from the resource plans themselves, and then only have to track separately non-labor costs like your travel and materials and supplies and contracts and software, etc. And then ultimately, dashboard and reporting. We have a variety of reports and dashboards available to you see these things, but you can see them as a natural output for people that maybe aren't hands-on within OnePlan all the time. We have Power BI dashboards that are fed with all of the data that's available from OnePlan, so you can get a comprehensive look at those things in reports as well. Now, these connectors that we talked about today, these are not custom integrations. These are productized connectors in the OnePlan, OneConnect platform that allow us to connect to these popular work management tools that we'll talk about today and agile software development tools as well. But we have a variety of other genres of tools like financial systems, service management tools, CRM systems, et cetera, that we also connect to. So with that, I would like to go to our demonstration. So here we are in OnePlan. And as I look at OnePlan, I come in here at a portfolio level. And at this portfolio level, you can see that I have different portfolios, in this case, loosely tied to different parts of the organization or different aspects of the organization. And we have the concept in here of what we call plan types. And in these plan types, I've got different portfolios, and I've got programs, and then I have projects and epics, which indicate more agile projects in here. But this structure is totally configurable by you, the user. And as we go through here, we can take a look and see as we expand this, there's programs within these portfolios. And then in this top portfolio, we can see there's a number of projects and epics in here. Now, for the purposes of our topic today, in here, not only is the structure important and the metrics you might want to look at here in the portfolio, but it's also important that you could actually derive these plans from different execution or work management tools. For example, I have this plan here that's getting its tasks from Microsoft Planner. We've got this one getting tasks from Azure DevOps, one that's getting tasks from Smartsheets, one that's getting them from Jira or Microsoft Project for the Web or Microsoft Project Professional. And we have some that only have a Teams icon, which is saying we're doing Teams for collaboration and content, but the scheduling and the work management is actually being done in OnePlan itself. So even in one portfolio, which is a subset of multiple portfolios, you can see there's a myriad of tools that are being used that are being pulled together right into OnePlan. And the tools are in here to meet the needs of the different personas, the portfolio manager, the project manager, the resource manager, the executive, etc. Okay, so if I look at this, I'm looking at a list view here that's more KPI oriented, for example. But let's just say I went into here and I wanted to look at more of a resource effort summary view. Now, what's rolling up here in this summary view would be more of a, this one's grouped by business units and the projects and epics that are being done within those business units. And I can see what's been committed, what the scheduled effort is, how many actual hours have been reported against these and remaining effort, and what kind of variances we have. And even have some check marks here to see if we have still yet staffing left to do that has not been completed yet. So we can flag that there's some actions that need to be taken within that. So we can look at these by a variety of ways. In this case, I'm looking at them by business unit, by any metadata we capture around this. I can look at them by executive sponsor or funding source or whatever it might be. I also have board views in here. And I've had these board views of the portfolio. In this case, I'm looking at a board by what state they're in. So I've got proposed, I've got active, I've got on hold. And in the active, if you notice here, I've got the cards that I've decided what to put on there. I've got access to the data for any of these very quickly if I want to look at more than what's on the card and be able to look at the quick edit data here that allows me to see, what the detailed aspects are of, say, this particular project or effort is, to have it come up and look at that. And then when that comes up, we can actually work with that and kind of analyze where we're at with this particular card as we go through. We can also set limits here. So right now I'm looking at a financial limit that says I set a limit of active projects of $10 million. And I can see I've blown past that in the red. It's at over $16.5 million. But from a resource management perspective, I could do the same thing. Let's say I looked at this board with by state, but had an effort constraint. And I said, I can't do more than 26,000 hours in active projects. And right now it's looking like I have committed in here into this active pane 27,000. So as I'm looking to see what I'm doing, maybe I shouldn't have dragged one of these proposed items into here as I should have, because I violated that constraint. I could also do the same things if I'm using more agile approaches, like if I'm using WIP or work in process limits. I could set limits to the counts of the types of items that are in here. And I can see that I set a work in process limit in the active of 25, and right now I've got 29 in there. So I may have to adjust that because I'm working in an over allocated way that might put me at risk of delivering in a good fashion. Now, if I go back to the list view of the portfolio and I go look at, just a list of all the different projects that are there, and I want to drill into a specific project. Let me drill into this data warehouse migration project. Now in there, you can configure what you see in here, but what you'll notice is that there's a number of things that are available to us. If I go to the details page, which is all configurable at the data that you want to have here, like the life cycle and the phases of a project, the metadata you want to capture around this project, the business case data that came over from the idea of the request that we talked about, the prioritization that we did and the method we did for the prioritization score, and even look at where we're at currently with schedule and how we're doing on financials. And for resourcing, look at what we spent to date and how we're doing on that work plan right now. And even look at our effort health and see that we're actually on track or green for that effort health. So the idea of the details that you want to structure and show in a details page is completely configurable by you, the user, okay? Now, if I go into the resource plan itself, right, and look at that dimension, this is where we can plan strictly on resources. Now, where I'm going to start is in what we call a committed plan, which is really that top-down capacity plan we talked about in the slides. And in this particular case, I've got a top-down plan that has a combination right now of both generics and named individuals. So I have some generics in here that I haven't actually put names to yet, right? And it's shown here on a monthly basis, but this could be down to as little as a weekly increment in this type of top-down capacity plan. And if this mix of generics in here, it could be generic roles, it could be teams, if you want to put in here generically, with people as being member of different teams that you can put on, etc. So you can actually get that in here. And also notice that I have designations over here for both committed and checked in the green and proposed allocations, meaning that we haven't necessarily committed those yet. We're still waiting for a, say, functional manager to basically get me who I need on these particular things as I go through, so we can do this and go through a full negotiation process within the system. Now, as I go in here and I look and I see that I still have a generic business analyst on here. And as I look for a generic business analyst, I see that I need them for two different parts of here, 50 hours in December and 16 hours in March, and I haven't fulfilled that. So I can actually here or at other places in the system look for candidates, and I can look by criteria, by how these resources are categorized, or I can even just do a simple best match. And in that best match, I can see that for these time periods, it looks like these first two resources, Sophia King and Jan Levinson, both have remaining availability showing here that I could actually go in there and say, let me pick Sophia King and let me place that generic up above with Sophia. Just same thing if I had an overallocated person, I can do that replacement or a fulfillment of that resource partially to make sure that I get that resource allocation done and make the changes I need so that I can balance this a little bit better, okay? Now, this is all from a top-down perspective that we're looking at this, right? And we talked about the more bottom-up perspective. Now, notice here I've got this planned in hours. So I'm looking at these in terms of hours per month. You could plan or view these things in percentages of allocation or FTEs. So here, for example, I can see that in August, I've got Ben Feldman for 0.43 FTEs, or 43% of his full-time equivalents, right? But even though it's partial, it's showing red. And it's showing red because he has other things in the system outside of this project that are already speaking for him full-time. So it's always got an eye on the total picture, even as we're looking at things within the individual project. On this other fashion, instead of the top-down committed, we could look at this from maybe a bottoms-up perspective. And that bottoms-up perspective would be from the schedules or the work items themselves. So for example, if I come in here and I look at Bertram Guilfoyle, and I see that he's over-allocated over here. Why is that he showing over-allocated on this project? Well, one is, he's not over-allocated on this project. Once again, it still has its total eye on everything, but now it's listing the specific tasks that he's on within this project and the resource allocations that he's on, this time by FTEs. I could just toggle that back and forth and look at that at hours as well, but it's basically rolling the bottom up. Or I could look at timesheet hours that have been brought in here for actuals as well. So if I are looking at the top-down commitment that I made, right, or the early assumptions that I made, and then I go in and say I want to compare those assumptions with what the detailed schedule now says, I can very easily come in here and take a look and see that, in August, I wasn't planning of any Toby Stevens, but I need a small 3% of his effort now, which is more than I needed in here. It's highlighting that for me. Here it's looking, I needed less than what I thought, so I'm showing as green. But here it's highlighting the areas where the deltas or the differentiation was between the committed plan and what's actually in the detailed schedule itself. So I can make adjustments based upon the current situation on the ground. Okay. Now, the other thing that we can do is look at resource dashboards. So if you have people that are non-OnePlan users, we feed all this data to Power BI, and we have some dashboards in Power BI that we can look at, and we can work with that as we see fit. If you like, we can show you some of those reports here shortly. Now, if we go and think about in terms of the detailed work plan where the scheduled bottoms up information came from, we can be looking at a variety of things. One, we could be looking at a schedule that can be built right here in OnePlan. You could build them from templates, you can build them from scratch. And in a planning view, you'll see that I have resources assigned here, right? That I can choose from people in the resource pool. I have hours associated here. There may be costs associated with those resources, etc. And if I look at this maybe from more of an effort-oriented view within this work plan in this schedule, you can see that I've got the planned effort, I've got the timesheet hours and remaining effort for the resources that are on here. So as I'm working through that, I can see that, right? I can also see in here that even though this one in particular isn't built using another scheduling tool, I could have built this by connecting it to a number of tools that I've activated connectors for in here. In this case, I could have used Smartsheet, Project for the Web, Microsoft Planner, and Project Professional. Now, on the backlog side of things, and I'm doing more agile approaches, we have a backlog work type that allows us to structure right within OnePlan in more of a backlog rather than a waterfall fashion, right? The work items, and here I've got requirements and user stories, for example. I might even, bundle those into sprints. Excuse me, and be able to allocate and put limits on those sprints about what, how many story points, et cetera, or hours might be available to work with in those sprints, for example. So I can look and do those types of things. But also, just like with the scheduling tools, I could come in here and I could have connected this backlog to an agile tool like a Jira or like an Azure DevOps and have this data dynamically connected and brought into here and rolled up into the portfolio for all those portfolio views we showed you earlier on. And we can even do the same things with issues and risks if you wanted to size those things and assign people to things like issues and risks and changes in here as well, and have that become part of the resource workload if you'd like. Okay. So if I go back to the portfolio itself and I look at, in particular, let's say, a project that's coming from Azure DevOps, I can look at the connected plan. I can even open, if I have rights to that tool, I can actually open up the plan over in Azure DevOps. And you can see it's tied off at the epic level. And this epic has children items in here. So for example, the next children items are features, but there's user stories below that. And I can even access the OnePlan portfolio and resource management capabilities from within here. But for this particular epic, I can also open up epic specific information of what's been synced over to OnePlan right from here within Azure DevOps. So for example, the people that are working in Azure DevOps, if they're only working in Azure DevOps, they don't necessarily have to ever leave. They could do the things they need. And here's that details page we talked to you about earlier on. The financials, which part of that is derived from the labor cost that's coming in here. The resource plan itself that we talked about, right, for the individual epic that's in here. And then the individual work plan, we can actually see the backlog as it has been synchronized over, and we can see the items in here, the features and the user stories and the tasks that have been synchronized back over to OnePlan and then rolled up into that mix. So this connected world is all here for us to work with and roll those items into here. And the same thing is true if we're using Smartsheet or Jira or Project for the Web. Okay. Now, ultimately, this is going to all roll up into a comprehensive resource plan. And that resource plan here, if I'm just looking at just an overall resource summary with an alphabetical list of all the resources, I can see that committed or that top-down plan is here, right? And in that resource plan, I can see that there's lots of over allocation challenges. And let me just start down here and let's look at Bertram, because it looks like he's over allocated over here. So Bertram Guilfoyle, if I look at this top-down plan, it's because he is on all these projects here. Now I'm looking at this in terms of hours. Once again, I could look at this in terms of FTEs and other things like that. So maybe just for simplicity, maybe I'll just change that over to FTEs, and I'll see that he's 1.89 FTEs committed in June, which is a severe overallocation for him to work through, right? I might go in here and say, maybe I can get him off some of the smaller things like this market research piece. If I go here at the global level and say, let me look at candidates here for replacement, and I can, once again, I could find somebody who could do that in this role, and I can see there's some good candidates that have remaining availability in the green here that I could do a replacement for here on that best match to get him off of this market research piece. So once again, I have options there to do that. I also have the ability to view these resource plans in a variety of different ways. For example, here I'm just looking at a plain list of resources. Maybe I want to aggregate these by their different roles. And at this point, for example, I can see as I aggregate these different roles, I can see that overall in my developer ranks, let me do this by say FTEs, I can see that I need, 7.88 developers in July, but I only have a capacity of 6. That's why they're showing overallocated as red. And what's they're based on? They're based on all these different developers, and I still have some generic developer assignments that I still have yet to put names to. So the idea is I can use this and use the replace function to make sure these generics become specific named individuals, but I can also see the total demand here at one place. And whatever metadata you have on these resources, for example, if I want to look at it by business unit or whatever else it might be, I can look at it that way as well. Okay, so once again, I can come in here and say what's going on and with the resources in product development, and I can look at the ones that are allocated to those. I will say this, that the same comparisons are here. So if I wanted to be able to compare, the capacity to the scheduled, et cetera, just like we saw in the individual projects. But we also have the ability to do the dashboards for the non-users as well. Now, if I go back to the project portfolio, I could have a variety of different views. So let me look at this from a portfolio prioritization view. And this one will give me a list of these things, and I think it's going to rank them in priority order based on the prioritization score, based on a prioritization method. And this could be whatever prioritization method or calculation you would like to use, including you might have a score that gets generated based on your methodology. On the other hand, you can also force rank these things to basically say, yeah, I know the score is this, but number 8 should really be number 5, and I can force rank these things and move those around for preference, on compliance, on management prerogative, whatever it might be, so that I can get a true ranking or forced ranking of these projects as I go in here and try to do some prioritization on these types of things. Now, in this, I could say, okay, here's my current portfolio. At any given point in time, I can come in here and look at this portfolio and say, what's the resource implications of this? So given this portfolio, if I do all of this, it's going to tell me down below what that means from a resource perspective as I look at that information. So as I can see, I've got some bottlenecks and some red here based upon what's up here. And I can do some things like say, well, what if I chose not to do one of these, right? And look at that. And I can basically look and have it re-rack that to see if it helps me out with my resource constraint. Or I can take projects, say, maybe that are proposed, and I can maybe drag those out into a subsequent year and basically say, let me take this proposed project and say, let's delay that out to another year and have that re-rack based upon that as well. Ultimately, as we go in and look at these things, we can look at what we can do and not do based upon the current state of the portfolio. We can take that another step further and do what we call a what if scenario with our modeler. And in that modeler, we can show individual models. We can create different models and then have different scenarios within the model. So here I've got a model for the information technology department, and I have a scenario for the IT, the model here for the IT planning. And so this model might have a variety of scenarios, and I can choose which projects to put in here as particular candidates. In this case, I've got a model in here that has 35 potential projects or initiatives in here, right? Some are proposed, some are active, right? And if if I put constraints on this, I've got two scenarios in here right now. I've got one with a $10 million budget. And in that $10 million budget, I went through that prioritization, I went through that selection process, et cetera. And out of that selection process, notice that only 22 made the cut to get me under that number that I need in order to get that to happen. If I came in here and I wanted to look at a $12 million budget, I did another scenario. So what if I can get another couple $1 million on this? I can see that I got up to 23 projects that I could get done in here within that, and these are the projects that didn't make the cut. Now, as I look at this, I could look at this scenario and say, what's the resource implication on this, like I did before? And I can see here that I'm not looking too bad. I only have a few red bottlenecks in here that I might have to deal with in order to make that happen. I might go in here and look at the financial aspect of that, which part of that can be driven by labor costs, right? And I can see to fit within that $12 million budget, this worked out just fine. However, I could, if I was over allocated on these types of things, both from a resource and from a financial perspective, I could even not only just do select and deselect projects, but I could come in here and I could take a proposed project, for example, and I could say, what if I took this proposed project and maybe moved it into the subsequent year? And as I do so, it's going to change that number down below here. And now I've got a number that's reduced for this period, for this particular calendar year, because I moved that out of there. I still want to do this, but I've just decided that I want to defer this. And I could save yet another subsequent scenario that includes time phasing of these projects, just as well as the selection of those projects. Now, outside of that, I can do further analysis. I can come in here and say, you know, as I compare the $10 million budget with the $12 million budget, is there any benefit to that? Well, according to this model, it looks like the $12 million budget isn't going to get me really any more benefit for the additional $2 million to spend. I've done other models, for example, where additional $2 million to spend would have got me an additional $5 million of benefit. It might be worth us going out and looking at taking on more of those projects and getting the funding to do that. You can even also look at details around this as far as from the different scenarios that you want to compare and see what projects are in and which projects are out, and compare the prioritization that you put within each of those scenarios to see which are your priorities in each of those scenarios, for example. And you can even do things like your traditional bubble charts. So as you're looking at more of the portfolio management bubble charts that we're used to seeing in prioritization, I can see of the projects that I selected, I can see their prioritization scores on the y-axis. On the x-axis, I can see the benefits. So I can see that some of the higher benefit ones that we have are some of the bigger projects, which is good. It seems like I have a high benefit project out here with a you know, kind of a medium prioritization score. I can even come in here and look at which ones we didn't select to make sure we're not overlooking ones that maybe should be on here based upon the benefits that we can achieve from these types of things. So once again, you can do all these different models and do some analysis of what we should be doing as we go through here, and make the right choices on what we should work on and when. All right, now the last piece I'll end on is the aspect of Sophia, and that's the AI. Now we do whole webinars on the AI because it can you know, we can go a myriad of different scenarios. But let me just, you know, maybe go to a resource summary view, and it'll look at these things in the context of our current plans. And let me just ask Sophia a question. I'll just say, Sophia's here in the lower right, and Sophia comes with the solution. And I'll say, rank the resources by highest risk and why, and let it give me just a general analysis of what risks I have in this resource plan. And as it's thinking, it'll come up with some answers on this. But the key is, in whatever area of the OnePlan you're in, if you're looking at resource data, or you're looking at portfolio data, or you're looking at requests or ideas, etc., right? You can ask it questions in the context of the data in that view, and in the context of all the data that it knows about from not only OnePlan itself, from learning about our application and our solution, but also the general knowledge it has from Microsoft's OpenAI in Azure, which is its own bounded thing in here. So I can see here that the risks we have with our project managers, right? The risks that it's identifying with our business analysts, that we have over allocation and involvements on multiple projects and high overage of overcommitment hours, etc. So it's going to give us detailed information on all these things. Some other use cases for resource management, you can actually go into a plan without a resource plan and ask it to suggest a resource plan and roles, and it will give you a suggested resource plan, etc. So given the time we have today, we won't go into that, but just be aware that there's a lot of things that you can do with Sophia to assist in your analysis and actually creation of data or building of plans that you might want to have. I would say this, we didn't talk on the actuals piece of this, but I think I'll just finish with the fact that there is a built-in time reporting and timesheet system within OnePlan. And if you'll notice that the projects that came in from Azure DevOps, we can charge time to those. The projects came in from Smartsheets, we can charge to those. The ones that came in from Project for the Web, we can charge to those. So the idea, regardless of where the data comes from an execution planning tool, we've brought that all together into a common hub and be able to report time on that. And we can not only report time on each, but we can actually put notes of explanation for each of the time charges granularly. We can even do comments and conversation threads on these to basically make comments on all these things as well. And there's also full approval processes so that your functional and project managers can do approvals on these things as you go through this process. So with that, I will transition back to our slides and then talk about some summary and next steps. I would say this, as you're contemplating stepping up your game in resource management from wherever you are in the organization, I would just encourage you to assess your readiness and be honest with yourself. Understand your resource management maturity about what you can tackle, what you can sustain, what you can actually accomplish right now. Also put that in the context of the culture and the environment you're in, about what you can and cannot do. And I build a resource management roadmap. Just because you've got this next step that you can accomplish doesn't mean you can't go farther, but build a roadmap to grow and mature as you go through this. And then put a practical action plan in place to get to the next maturity level on a timetable that makes sense for your organization. But I would say this, define your process first, then automate it, okay? Now, OnePlan can be a great enabler to help bring that process into clarity for you, so it can actually be a good help as you define your process and put it into place. But once again, as the picture says, just take the baby steps, move the ball forward a little bit and gradually improve until you to get to where you want to be. Now, in a summary, resource management is a critical success factor for overall PPM success. It's not standalone, it's tied to the whole mix. And the approach and process should align with your organizational readiness and maturity, like I said. High-level capacity planning is a good place to start, and it may be where the only thing you do at first or ongoing. But more detailed resource allocation from the bottom up can follow as ready or as needed. Some folks never even do that, but many need it. And OnePlan provides a great platform for all the PPM capabilities that I walk you through today. It connects various execution tools into a comprehensive portfolio hub, which is important because it brings it all together into one big resource plan, one big portfolio. And it also enhances all aspects of your top-down and bottom-up resource planning and analysis, and really gives you a full functional system on that score. And OnePlan is fully integrated and embedded in the Microsoft cloud, so it's part of your ecosystem. You actually authenticate using your Azure AD, the same authentication you use for your Microsoft or Office 365. So it's all tied together in the same ecosystem. OnePlan is currently recognized as a leader. We do portfolio management and project management, and Microsoft recognizes the last 5 years running as either the winner globally or a finalist in that discipline. We're also recognized by Gartner, who just recently recognized us in the Peer Insights Voice of the Customer for Strategic Portfolio Management as a leader here, also by places like Infotech Research, etc. You can do free trials. If you want the full functional one that I showed you today, strategic portfolio management may be the way to go, but adaptive is also something that you might want to look at there as well. You can go to oneplan.ai/solutions or to Microsoft App Source. We're happy to offer you a free roadmap workshop to kind of assess where you're at, where you want to go to, and give you an idea what it's going to take to get there at no cost or obligation to you and what these things might cost. So the free trial, we're happy to chaperone you on that as well and support you to make sure you get the most out of it. The roadmap workshop, where we can just schedule a more detailed demonstration for you. This is very high level today. reach out to us at contact@oneplan.ai or look and research more about us at www.oneplan.ai. So once again, we're at the top of the hour. I'd like to thank you for taking time out of your day today to either watch live or to listen to the recording. There's my email there if you want to reach out to me individually for whatever, but we refer to OnePlan as tapping into the power of one hub. It brings one interface, one experience, one hub, all into one plan for the entire organization. Thank you and have a great day.